So this is the planning board meeting. It's Monday, January 27th at 7 p.m. Please note that this meeting is being made available to the public through an audio recording, which will be used to ensure an accurate record of proceedings produced in the minutes of the meeting. All comments made in open session will be recorded. PAC TV is providing this service live on Comcast Xfinity Government Access Channel 9. Those without cable, visit YouTube for live streaming. And we're all here in person today, so there's no one participating remotely. So, first on our agenda tonight is a meeting with Carolyn Murray, Esquire, KP Law, on discussion of revising zoning bylaws, accessory dwelling units, lot size changes, public utilities use, and possible changes to extend residential commercial district on Washington Street. So, we put a lot on your plate.
Good evening, members of the board. Nice to be with you again. Which one do you want to begin with?
Well, in our packets, we've got the ADU zoning bylaw.
Okay. So the ADU, and I assume, Susan, did you give them the version that I sent today? So apologies for sending you a late breaking addition to this, but as you may have heard, on Thursday, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities decided to issue unofficial final regulations on ADUs. The final regulations still need to come out through the Secretary of State's office by January 31st, but I guess the agency wanted to get them out sooner rather than later to folks. So I took a look at where we left off in January, which incorporated the changes we discussed back in December, to see if there was anything further to look at based on the final regulations. And if you've got my draft that was distributed this afternoon, it really comes into a couple of questions under the Residence A uses allowed, that's section 5. The first one being 5A, about the size of the ADU being no larger in gross floor area, inclusive of all lofts and attics areas 7 feet or greater in height, than 1/2 the gross floor area of the proposed or existing dwelling, or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller. As you know, the built-in definition from the state now is that 1/2 the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, or 900 square feet. So, to a certain extent, there's really no need to repeat it again here. We could delete that.
Well, doesn't this also provide a narrower definition?
Well, and then that is part of the problem, that when it comes to the treatment of lofts and attic areas, the regulations and the bylaw are a little bit at odds with each other. So that if we propose a bylaw that is inconsistent with the regulations promulgated under state law, the Attorney General is going to strike that provision anyway. So we can either tie it into the state regulations, or we can just delete that 5A altogether and just default to the state regulations rather than include it in our bylaw. That's whatever the wish of the board happens to be. So similarly with the subparagraph B, something that EOHLC added in the final regulations is that a municipality cannot prohibit this is what they're calling a protected use ADU. That's one that satisfies the state definition of an ADU under the Affordable Homes Act. We are not allowed to prohibit such an ADU in an existing structure, dwelling, or lot due to nonconformance. So looking at your paragraph B, where we had said that the subject lot and or the proposed or existing dwelling must conform to dimensional requirements, that's going to be at odds, obviously, with the regulations. So my thought was either we can, again, strike subparagraph B and default to the regulations, or I propose that language that's highlighted to say, except as otherwise provided in 760 CMR, the regulations. So in other words, you are allowed to say that the ADU is subject to the same dimensional requirements as the principal dwelling, with the exception of lot size. And then we know we're going to have ADUs and principal dwellings, some that comply with zoning, and then there are going to be some that are non-conforming structures. So if we throw that except for language in, I think we cover our bases, that depending upon whether someone is coming to us with a conforming or a non-conforming principal dwelling, or a conforming or non-conforming attached or detached accessory dwelling unit, I think we're covered. But again, I don't think that subparagraph 5B is critical to the bylaw.
So if we took it out, we'd just be deferring to the state law.
Correct. And
That also cover us like for non-conforming lots in general? Because a lot of the town has non-conforming lot sizes, right?
right, it would.
I think taking it out makes the most sense.
So taking out both of these?
Yes,
paragraphs?
yes.
So on A, with reference to the lofts, which is our verbiage, right? And the state makes no mention of lofts.
Well,
No, the state does mention lots, and they specifically, one of the dimensional requirements that we are allowed to apply to ADUs, we're allowed to say that the ADU has to comply with the same dimensional requirements that apply to the principal dwelling, except for lot size. That was in the original draft, and they crossed that out. So now there's this, a little bit more flexibility given, if you will, to non-conforming structures and lots, to not
So
deprive
It
them.
would cover the pre-existing non-conforming uses and lots.
It would,
Okay.
it would, yes,
And if we took it out, we'd just be pointing to the state law.
correct.
Sorry, I was asking about lofts, not lots.
Oh, I'm sorry, lots,
So if there's,
That was just
so we
where-
make mention of, so I'm sorry, 5A,
yes,
That's the square footage.
but the state, we make mention of lofts, the state does not.
Right, and what is recommended is that we take that out as well, because it's in conflict with the state law,
Because they make no mention of it.
because they make no mention of
What's the
it.
definition, so they are not allowed,
If-
or is there a definition of a loft?
if I may. So the amended definition that the state gives us for gross floor area, it includes basements and lofts.
Okay,
It excludes crawl spaces, garage parking areas, attics, enclosed porches, and similar structures.
thank you.
So again, by eliminating that paragraph, we'd be deferring to the state law as written.
Right. So if there's any other provision in your zoning bylaw that refers to gross floor area and defines it a little bit differently for that section, it's not going to impact this provision.
Right. In the definition of uses of allowed, we say the one accessory dwelling unit. We don't say anything about attached or detached, but that's in the state law.
Correct. The
So we
state,
don't have to define that for them.
you don't. Under the state law, it's an attached or a detached ADU that's now allowed by right.
If I remember, did we discuss if it was, not in detail, but just brought up that if it was detached, we may or may not require a review? Is that a possibility?
No, there was a question of multiple ADUs on a site, and one is allowed by right. If we wanted to allow additional ADUs on a site, we could do that requiring a special permit.
Right. I think we might have, when I was here in December, we did talk a little bit perhaps about site plan review is an option available to municipalities if they want to subject an ADU to site plan review. And I think I might have mentioned, at least at the time, a couple of communities were considering site plan review for detached ADUs. Because the thought being usually accessory structures have a lesser setback, so they might be more intrusive on an abutting
Right.
property.
Oh, that's what we're talking about.
But I thought the consensus of the board was not to do that, at least
Yeah.
this board.
Yeah.
Then turning the page, under subparagraph C, this one's a little bit of a gray area. The final regulations, and even the draft regulations to a certain extent, said that we can't subject an ADU to design standards unless those same design standards apply to the principal dwelling. And we've had a lot of discussion internally or at some of our meetings about what does this mean? Because it's not uncommon, as you have here, to say you want the ADU to maintain like the single-family look. I don't know that that's necessarily a design standard. When I think of a design standard, I think of things like you have to use clapboard shingles, or that there's, something about the materials more so than just you want to continue the look of a single-family home. I can tell you that at least one community that had their town meeting to amend their ADU bylaw in December had language similar to your paragraph C here. And the attitude was, this might be struck down as an impermissible design standard. It might not, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. If you're inclined to want to keep it in, we could certainly keep it in for now. We should have the Attorney General's reaction to that provision of the bylaw sometime in March. So there would still be time to capture it for, your town meeting. If we find out that that's considered an impermissible design standard, we could always address it in the motion for town meeting.
Yeah, I hate to do that.
I know.
Because that just confuses people if you do it on town meeting floor, except that can we adjust the article before, is there a deadline for that? Because we have to go through the public hearing process.
Right. So there will be a deadline for, submitting everything to for the inclusion in the warrant. Then planning board's going to have a public hearing on all this. And you are still allowed to tweak the bylaw proposal based on feedback you get at that public
Yeah.
hearing. The question really becomes, when does the warrant go to print?
Right.
And that can vary. But my guess is you have a little bit more time. So what did you say, Susan, that the articles have to be in soon, don't they?
February
Yes.
10th?
February 10th. But as far as print, I believe Sabrina told me today, like April 25th.
Okay, and we would do the public hearings March 23rd, did you
I'm
say?
going to try to do March 3rd.
March 3rd. And we can do these, for all these bylaws, we can do them concurrently in one public hearing?
Sure.
Okay.
Do we also vote on them, like all at the same time in the town meeting, or are we going to be different numbers?
They'll be different.
They'll be different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, certainly we have, if we decide on March 3rd, are we here? When did you think that we'd be hearing from the state on this?
They have 90 days from close to December 20th, I think it was, that town submitted all of their materials to the Attorney General's office. Will they take the full 90 days? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, however, where now that we've got final ADU regulations and this is one of the first bylaws that they'd be reviewing, it could take the full 90 days. So it could be just after your planning board public hearing that we hear. If we hear sooner than that, I will certainly let you know.
Well, what does the board think? What's any input or feedback or opinion on this piece of it?
On just C?
Yeah. I think the intent, if I read it correctly, is to make sure that if an ADU is added to a home, that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb.
Right.
I mean, it reads fairly specific to exit stairwells, so that they're on the sides and back, and you don't have one across the front of the home either, which I think could certainly alter the look of the home,
Yeah.
not just siding and appearance.
I'm inclined to keep it in.
Yeah, I would
That's
agree.
just me, I don't know.
I would kind of agree with the statement. Keep it in, see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly have time to take it out.
Yeah,
So if the Attorney General's office doesn't like it, we have to take it out, does that still work with town meeting? Like,
yeah.
It does, I mean,
All right,
even,
so-
even if you go forward to town meeting with this language in there,
Yeah.
and the Attorney General's inclined to strike it,
Yeah.
she'll just strike that one paragraph, you still
Right.
have the rest of the bylaw. I'm hoping they give a little bit of leeway on this, and not consider this to be a design standard.
I'm comfortable with that.
I'm good with that.
So that was all I had on the ADUs.
And-
Yeah, I'm comfortable with leaving something on and striking it at a later point. Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay, so there's no problem with the proposed or existing principal dwelling and the ADU shall remain in common ownership?
No.
Okay.
In my opinion, it has to stay in common ownership, because if you alienate the principal dwelling from the ADU by definition is no longer accessory to anything, it's just a dwelling unit all by itself.
Gotcha.
So I think that's fine.
Good. Yeah, that looks good. I'm glad we had something to start with.
So I can make those couple of revisions and get that to Susan, so you have that to start with. So, what would you like to tackle next?
So, next on the list,
Lot size?
lot size changes.
That one, when we met back in December, I had no issues with it. That's really a policy decision for the board.
Yeah. I have had some folks push back a bit. But again, you know, it's part of our master planning process. It's been identified as something that we said we would pursue. It's pretty straightforward. And I think we should go through at the very least, we'll go through the public hearing process with it and put it out there and see if it, what the response will be. But we're practically at build-out, as we found out with the master plan. We've got about 400 acres of available land for residential use, and this would certainly lend towards more production, housing production. And, you know, we've got a housing production plan too as well. So it fits in with the goals of the town as put forth in the master plan. So at some time, we're gonna have to, you know, work with it. So,
So my only comment is, and it was before, was that this is used for calculation in other areas, like cluster age housing.
yeah, I don't think it is.
You don't think it is?
No.
This is what we had them go
We had the
by?
question, remember, if you do the age-restricted cluster zone, which requires that the applicant show how many single-family homes can be put on that land,
Right?
and that's the number that they would get to build on 50% of the land, and leaving the other 50% open space. And that only applies to parcels that are 30 acres or more. So right there, we're limiting the amount of available parcels for that. We don't, there's not a lot that are 30 acres or more that could even apply. That, well, could change, sure.
But they still have to, so there's not many parcels that would qualify, but they would still be using the,
Well, that's the question for council
Okay.
is, the calculation now is, what can you put on 40,000 square foot, right? With 150 feet of frontage. So the applicant would divide out the 30-acre parcel or more into how many single-family housing units he could build on that, and that would give him the calculation.
Right, I'm just looking to see. each of the building lots shall be of a size and shape as to provide a building site that shall be in harmony with the natural terrain, but no such lot shall have an area of less than 40,000 square feet as shown on the site plan.
Okay?
Okay, so it's
So
covered in there.
That
Yeah.
covers it.
Good.
So even if we
And then
change-
further on, we say the maximum density for dwellings shall be 1 unit of housing for every 40,000 square feet of upland lot area.
That's right, yeah. You have to have
That'll
the
be
available
decent.
upland.
So it doesn't change that, so that's good.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's
That
good.
was my big concern.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. That was a good one. So, yeah, I think we'll let that, we'll let the process work its way through. And we'll see what people think, and we'll see what happens at town meeting. All right, next on the list, public utilities use.
Oh, there was one more with the Business B amendment as well, where you wanted to change the 450 feet to 800 feet?
Yes.
Unless is
Yeah,
that...
if you want to cover that first, we'll cover that
I
first.
was just going to say,
So-
I didn't have, again, I think that's a policy decision. The only question I had was we were also starting to change a point 100 feet south of Puddingbrook to north of Puddingbrook. You could be absolutely right, it just struck me as a little odd going in a different direction, that we should just double check that that was the intent.
Well, this was to extend the Business B zone to the same dimensions as the residential commercial zone in that area. Because otherwise you're getting into the Residence A piece there. And, but the anomaly here is we've got that small piece of Business B smack in the middle of residential commercial. And I finally figured out why. It's because there's a gas station across the street. So that's not a use allowed in the residential commercial district, but it's allowed in Business B, so it is kind of an egregious example of spot zoning, although I'm not sure it was done for that purpose. I can't go back and, I don't know why the decision was made to have that part of the zone be Business B. But what becomes problematic is if, and we've got this in the Center Protection District, so gasoline sales are no longer allowed in the Center Protection District, but we've got 2 gas stations there now. And anytime they go to do something different, and they require a new site plan, or a change of use involving other things, we tell them they can't do it because it's not allowed. So they're kind of stuck with what they're doing now.
Right.
So if that gas station on 53 wants to do something different, or it needs an upgrade or something there, we won't be able to allow it if it's not a use allowed.
Well, but if it's non-conforming, they do have the option of altering a non-conforming use, going through the zoning board process, right?
Yeah, but we would have made them non-conforming by changing the district. Like, we would have caused that.
But still, if they are rendered non-conforming, they do have the option of going to the zoning board of appeals for any sort of alterations they want.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But you're right, it's going to close the door on any possibility of future gas stations in
Right.
that area.
So I think that if we just extend the Business B out to the, how many feet is it again? Is that 800?
800.
800 feet,
Yeah. Because it stops at 450 now.
correct.
So if we just extend it out, I would advocate doing that. So does that make sense?
Do you know what we're talking about?
I do know what you're
This is
talking about.
what-
Yes.
So expanding the, yeah. I think it either makes sense to make it, you know,
Match.
yeah, either match or put yellow around the business, residential business.
Oh.
Either way.
That's,
works.
that'd be so confusing
I
then when applying
But-
for,
Something's
And
got
it
to
The
is
site-
be
zones
around
on
it.
every
Yeah.
parcel there.
and they'd be in conflict on uses allowed. So I think we should
One would be
just,
more restrictive.
yeah,
Yeah.
we just extend it out.
Yeah, I'm fine with- yeah, either way.
Okay.
I agree. Is that what this is? Trying, are we, It's a little confusing the way it's worded, but.
Right, but if you all understand what you're looking to accomplish, that's all that matters.
Okay, public utility use. If you look at the bylaw and you start with Residence A, there's something in there about municipal use, but there's nothing for public utility use. So we wanted to add that, and if we added it just to Residence A, wouldn't that cover us in all the other zones?
You could do that. So I will tell you, I had a conversation with Attorney Smith on behalf of National Grid, who shared, his presentation that he made to the board previously, and the two options being discussed. Do you do an overlay, or do you just allow it in a broader way throughout town? So you've got two proposals in your packet, and that reflects a draft shared by Attorney Smith, looked at by me, some further changes made, and then a minor further edit was made last night, I suspect after the football games were over, by virtue of when my email came through. But one of the things that Attorney Smith had mentioned to me is that you've got a transmission line kind of bisecting the town. And if you just do the overlay or to just zone this one parcel, or even if you're suggesting, Mr. Chair, if you just rezone, make the change for Residence A to allow, say, a public utility in Residence A, that's going to address your immediate need on this particular parcel. It may not necessarily address future needs anywhere along that transmission line.
Right.
And maybe the attitude is, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, because I imagine that if that transmission line bisects the entire town, it's running through a variety of zoning districts, some of which that right now you perhaps, maybe you don't want to allow a public utility in all town districts. So you could do it as you suggest, just address Residence A and allow the public utility there. But remember, the way your bylaw is structured, if you allow something in Residence A, the other zoning districts do build upon it,
Right.
unless you specifically say, with the exception of a public
Correct.
utility, for example.
Correct.
So
So if
you
you allow
might,
it in Residence A, you're basically allowing it in all the other zones.
or a good number of them, yes, yes. Unless we make a conscious decision otherwise. So one of the other proposals was to create an overlay district.
Yeah.
This is only a 4-acre parcel. An overlay generally is larger than a 4-acre parcel. But that being said, there isn't a prohibition against, or a restriction as to how big must an overlay district be. But it does seem, in terms of, I always try to think of, you've got to present this to town meeting and defend it. So when somebody's saying, we're creating just, an overlay district for something, that's that big, it does seem to be counterintuitive to the way we normally deal with overlay districts. If you allow it just in Residence A, you do address the immediate need without opening it up townwide. Or the other option is one of the drafts that was in your packet this evening that I call the townwide option, meaning it would be allowed, a public utility would be allowed, a use allowed by special permit in Residence A, Residence Commercial, Business A, and the Center Protection District. So it does open up more of the town, if you will,
Right.
to a potential use.
Isn't residential A use allowed in business A and B as well?
Yes.
And industrial, so it's,
Right, like I said,
It's
the
in-
way you structure it, everything sort of builds off
Right.
of Residence A, right?
Yeah.
So it's
so
really,
it'd be available anywhere in town, pretty much.
That's right.
but again, this would be a use allowed only by special permit, so you do have some discretion over it. One thing that was just added last evening is requesting that the planning board have the authority to waive all landscaping, dimensional, and buffer requirements.
No, we don't want to do that. That's why we have site
That's why I
plan.
wanted to bring it to your attention.
That is a giant
Can I
no.
speak briefly on that point? That would still require a separate finding. So it would be basically an additional special permit to waive that. And the idea behind it would be so that we don't have to go to zoning board.
Mhm.
So like one-stop shop, kind of almost comprehensive permitting, like one board address all issues.
Yeah,
all
site,
at once.
and that would be done through site plan review.
So still all before the planning board. It would
Yes.
just prevent us from having to go to zoning board first and then.
Would you get a waiver or a variance to not allow to not have to do
Yeah,
this?
presumably like a variance from like, say, a setback.
Because it's prohibited in the bylaw. You'd have to go to ZBA and ask for a variance or ask for permission.
Right.
Yeah. So we don't want to make it, we don't want to prohibit it, we don't want to prohibit that in the bylaw. We want to,
You want the planning board to have that flexibility to grant that waiver, or you want to send them?
yes, no,
Okay.
we want to have the ability to grant the waiver, and we probably won't grant it. We'll probably ask for the proper landscaping and buffer and everything else. That's
Okay.
why we want to have the site plan review.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
So the approach we're kind of looking at this, not the overlay approach, the other one,
Yes.
adding it to the bylaws. We're kind of looking at adding it to residential A, which then in turn adds it everywhere else.
Mhm.
Part of me feels like we are putting the cart before the horse instead of taking a step back and looking at the town and saying like, what area, what land makes sense to have a public utility in? Like, where do public utilities make sense? Because they don't make sense everywhere.
They only make sense where they need them to.
Well, that's a need, that's not necessarily ours. I feel like we should zone them for where they make sense. And if that doesn't fit with this exact parcel,
Mhm.
then they take step two.
Yeah, but
You know
what
what I mean? Like-
but I think what we're trying to do
Right now,
here,
we're saying it can be anywhere in town.
yes, because that's where
Yes.
that's where the public utilities are used. That's
That
where
is true.
that's where their services are delivered.
But that
So-
doesn't mean that we should have storage of, like, we look at the definition of a public utility, we're talking about gas, water, sewer, electricity, fuel. I mean, we shouldn't be storing fuel in any of our protected water, drinking water areas.
Yeah, but that also would require conservation review for that purpose. They'd have to
me,
file,
It feels like we're,
they'd have to file a notice of intent or,
you know,
all right, so there are the other
protections.
protections.
Fuel would fall under DEP as well, so that would have protection there too, right?
Where is that in this?
And the definition of public utility.
The wrong thing. This one, okay.
It feels like we're allowing almost anything, it's only like, our only influence over it is the special permit.
Yeah,
Whereas I'd rather see it more restricted, where it could be, and still allow, it's still the special permit process.
well, where does this definition come from?
It came from Council for National Grid, based on others that they've used. And I looked at it, compared it to some other communities. It's not out of line with what some other towns have done, but you are still free to narrow this if you feel it's too broad.
Well,
As the guy who did the master plan, I totally agree with what you're saying.
That we should look at where to put this first,
Exactly.
like that's.
yeah, but I don't think that we can always dictate that. I mean, we're not, again, it depends on what makes sense for delivery of the service or maintenance of the lines.
I agree with that element of it, where there may be a place that, there's a middle ground here, I feel like, which is that we're gonna say places we definitely don't want any of these, or some of these.
Yeah.
And then we also have that blanket statement of residence A, which then opens us up to everything, it sounds like. You could either restrict it by being more specific in those areas outside of residence A, and also be restrictive and saying definitely not here for anything. But that's we need to figure out what that is.
And we are talking about public utilities. These are services that people need and use.
And one thing I'd add is that there is a provision in the zoning act that would allow a public utility to petition the Department of Public Utilities for a zoning exemption. I'm not suggesting that National Grid is saying that that's what they would do, but it is an option that's available to them.
Clearly, it's something that they would do. That's why that
Yeah, they
provision is
mentioned
there.
But for example, like, we never would have probably, where they want to put this now, we probably never would have included that in the inclusion or exclusion area for what we're thinking.
Well, the other thing is
That would derive
if
from-
they have to go to the state will give them what they need, and they'll do it any way they want.
Right, without our.
And you lose your special permit, site plan review, and
Exactly.
buffering or screening.
That's
Exactly.
right.
Mhm.
So we at least get some control over the site plan and input over the site plan.
Right.
Whereas if the state gave them the right, they wouldn't need to do that,
Right.
so.
So I still think it should be by site plan review, special permit and site plan review. I just don't think it should be anywhere in the town of Pembroke.
Anywhere in the town of Pembroke?
Well, that, by saying residence A, we're saying.
Oh, anywhere,
This
anywhere.
could be allowed
Yeah.
anywhere in the town of Pembroke.
Yeah, and
Including center protection.
and
I think it should, we shouldn't allow it in center protection.
I disagree. So, I mean, we can continue the disagreement, and we are gonna go through the public hearing process. We gotta narrow it down, but I think by restricting it, we're saying that we know where these things will pop up, we'll know the future, we'll know, we know how to engineer a public utility to be most effective and efficient. I just don't think we do.
I
So.
don't think we're saying that we know how to engineer a public utility.
But if we're saying we know where to put it,
We're not saying we know where to put it, we're saying this is where we allow you to put it, in according to our zoning. And
Yeah.
if it fits, then a public utility may choose to put one there. If it doesn't fit, they may choose to put it somewhere else.
yeah, but I'm not, well, I
You know,
mean,
wherever that is, like,
I-
I'm assuming, like, for this example, transmission lines span multiple towns.
well, I'm not sure that
But
choice
I'm not saying that,
plays a role in it. I mean, it's maintenance of, it's delivery of services, it's demand increases. We're talking about public utilities. So I just find it hard to think that we could anticipate where these types of services and utilities would be located anytime in the future. And by restricting them, we do still run the chance that a public utility would go to the state and overturn all of, our ability to control it and have some input on site plan review. So, I mean, that's just my opinion.
So I apologize if I'm gonna repeat what I just said, but how can we clarify that, right? Can we say where you definitely cannot go, but also without saying all of residence A?
see, I don't know how I just don't understand how that works with saying, like, part of residence A, not part of residence A. Like, I feel like you either have all of residence A or not. Are you saying to split up residence A? No.
I think I'm trying to say that there's definitely areas you don't want these at all. But where is that fine line between saying not allowed in all these areas where they're gonna go to the state and steamroll us, and saying we wanna have our input, which is the review. But how is that best stated without saying, with that again, that middle ground of, we're not gonna allow you in 90% of our town when you go to the state, but also we're not gonna allow you in 90% of our town.
Yeah, but you also then, by doing that, you put all the burden on the 10%. And I don't think that makes very much sense either.
Right, and then we run the risk on that 90%.
So how do you state that? Can we state all the other zones or districts or areas without Residence A? Or because we exclude Residence A, we're excluding everywhere there's a telephone pole in Residence A?
Well, that's what I was wondering was, could we work backwards? Like, instead of starting with Residence A and saying allowed here, and therefore in commercial business, business 1 to industrial, could we start kind of at the other end of it and say, does it make sense here? Does the smaller districts, because Residence A is 90%.
But how would we
town.
know whether it made sense or not?
That's why I think we give them all the things that makes as most sense as it can without giving them 90% of the town. But, you know, without losing our review process. So I understand both sides. I don't know personally what.
I mean,
that is.
how do we know where the best cell phone
Yeah, no, I
tower
definitely agree with
would
that
go?
statement.
How
That's
do we
why I don't
know-
want to say, that's why I don't agree with saying, like, we'll give you these 3 areas, because somebody could come in and say, those don't make sense, and then we're just going to go to the state. So I'm trying to,
What does it make us most protected by saying everywhere in the town? Because then we at least get to have site plan review.
Well, that's it.
Then we get to specify, and if we wanted to increase a buffer somewhere, because we're just think that it's necessary, then we can, versus letting the state say, yep, they can put it there and they don't have to put any buffer up.
Right.
Or any trees or anything.
so if we think that conservation and the other departments are going to do their part, is along, you know, in conjunction with us, then I think, yes, I agree with that statement. Then I understand that that's where that's rooted, which is that we still have control. If we say Residence A, we still have that. We're just
Well,
relying on ourselves and.
what we're establishing here is oversight.
You are, yes. Well, you have,
Right.
you know, and I hear what you're saying about Residence A. Just bear in mind that the parcel that is before you, it's Residence A and Business B.
Yeah.
And where they propose to locate the substation is Residence A. So at a minimum, they're looking for at least that parcel to be zoned in a manner so they can put a substation in, which would be the overlay. If you wanted the narrowest approach, it would be the overlay. Or you could allow it in Residence A, and if you want to avoid that domino effect of all the other districts, you could then, we'd have to go through each of the other provisions for the other zoning districts and say, any use is allowed by special permit in Residence A, with the exception of a public utility use. And we have done that in the bylaw for other, not very often, but we do make those exceptions. But then having said that, it sounds like what you would be excluding would be some of the zoning districts where this might be a more compatible use, like, you know, would you want to exclude it from your industrial districts, for example, and your business districts?
That's why I was wondering if we could work from the other end, instead of starting at Residence A, could we start at industrial A or B where it is more compatible?
You could, but like I said, that's not going to solve this
Right.
specific problem
Or
for
any other
National
that,
Grid.
or any other that may come up based on,
Except that we would have zoning for it when we go to the state. Is that-
no, we wouldn't. We'd be limiting it to a certain zone first, that we think that's where they belong, putting all the burden of that on that zone, but there may be no burden at all because that zone isn't a location where they would even think about going because their need for transmission or demand or something else is in another zone that is not allowed in.
I just like us to be able to have the control of the site plan review at least, so if we, isn't solar, for example, allowed in any
This-
zone,
it-
correct?
The solar is excluded from this because we have a separate bylaw.
You
that
do.
addresses that.
But I'm just saying that, we don't have it set in a zone, right? It's allowed anywhere in town, correct?
I believe so, yes.
So could we have public use the same way and allowed anywhere in town with special permit?
Well, that's what this would do.
Right.
Okay.
I'm just saying it because it just sounds less like attacking the residents of the town versus making it a general for the town.
I know, but
In general.
we got to view it from the standpoint of where we want to have some oversight on this, to look out for the best interests of anyone who abuts this or could be affected by it. So it's really an oversight that we would be able to have over these types of projects. So, all right, so we've,
If I may just add one more thing too, you could also, if you look at, the special permit provision of the bylaw, if you feel like the public utility use requires some sort of extra criteria or consideration when it's in a residential district or when it's proposed to be within so many feet of a residential use, for example, you could also consider adding to your special permit criteria. Gives you a little more teeth as well.
yeah. Okay, well, let's keep proceeding with the process on this. What's next on our list?
So just to be clear on this one, we're going to continue with not with the overlay, but with the,
Yes.
at least town-wide for now,
Yes.
proposal. Okay.
Okay, that covers the list. That's next.
Oh, okay.
So, thank you.
You're very welcome.
It's a lot to cover in 45 minutes.
Sorry for interrupting you again.
Oh, that's okay.
All right, so next on our agenda is an informal discussion with Leanne Neal, Animal Control Officer, for a possible zoning bylaw definition change.
The next hearing date is March 3rd.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So, I understand that definitions for kennels were developed before I started in 2020. And what I am proposing is that those definitions be changed to be more conducive with what the state has for definitions of kennels. So I've added in what the new entries would be, a couple of new kennels, and then I'm proposing to make a change to the personal kennel. So personal kennels in the state used to state that you could have 4 or more dogs. They changed it a number of years ago to more than 4 dogs to a single person. So I could live in a house and you could live in a house and I could have 6 dogs and you could have 6 dogs. And that's a very large number of dogs. And we have a lot of small little houses here in Pembroke. So I propose to change our personal kennels to a packer collection of 4 or more dogs, 3 months old or older, owned or kept on a single premises. Otherwise, all of the other definitions are exactly what the state says.
Okay, I'm a little confused. So, there's 2 things here. Changing the proposed definitions of a commercial kennel.
Changing the proposed, all of the original definitions of kennels. We had hobby kennels, we had animal care facilities, and then we had one more.
So one is the definition of kennels, all right, or pet care businesses, or animal care businesses, or...
So the basic definition of a kennel is a pack or collection of dogs on a single premises, including a commercial boarding or training kennel, commercial breeder kennel, domestic charitable corporation kennel, personal kennel, or a veterinary kennel. A lot of those definitions we don't have. We do have a lot of those businesses here in town, though.
So what problem are we trying to solve?
Adding the missing definitions for kennels,
Okay,
adjusting the current ones so that they meet what the state has, and making that single adjustment to the personal kennel.
okay, are these definitions that we have in our current zoning in conflict with the state law? But we can still have our own definitions. We don't have to comply with a state definition necessarily.
Just makes it easier and more streamlined. It makes it easier for me to do my kennel inspections when the laws align with what the state has,
But
so
don't
that
you
I'm
have to
not questioning things.
But don't you have to follow the state guidelines anyway?
In theory, yes, state trumps the town. Yes, in
Right.
theory.
Okay.
But it also causes a lot of confusion if our definitions are different than the state's definitions too. Because there are a lot of businesses here in town that didn't know they need a special permit to operate here in town. They didn't know that we have definitions for kennels here in town. They didn't know any of that.
Okay, so, but your job is to make them or aware of that and to either conform with it through zoning or,
My job technically is to just inspect their facility.
okay. So it's not you're not dictating the zoning or the use or anything else. If someone has a kennel and it's in a zone that it maybe isn't allowed, that's really not your concern, right?
No.
So your concern is just inspection of the kennel?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, we've got a lot on our plate for this town meeting on this. I mean, I'd rather put this off, to be honest. And I don't think we're in that much conflict with the state. Again, the state's going to supersede our local definitions here, and you know, you, of course, got a better knowledge of the state requirements and everything. As far as zoning is concerned, we did make some changes to the zoning bylaws a couple of years ago in the Center Protection District, specific to allow some of these types of businesses. This is a use allowed in a lot of the business zones that we have, including industrial, or business B, I should say,
Yep.
specifically. So I think we're covered in zoning. And again, as far as hobby kennels are concerned versus personal kennels and amount of dogs allowed, we allow 6 to 10 dogs for hobby kennels. That covers a lot of canines.
That's a lot of dogs. And like we have we have tiny little pond cottages. And you have 9 dogs. And now coming down from the state, I'm required to tell you how many dogs you can have in your house if you want a kennel license.
But is that a professional kennel license, or is that a
All
hobby?
kennel licenses.
All kennel licenses?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Personal.
And what is that criteria?
They didn't give us any criteria. It is just based on our knowledge and
Welcome
common
to the-
sense.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. I'm learning a lot.
So we say 6 to 10 now. I mean,
The change to the personal kennel also gets me in to do an inspection. And a lot of times, when people have a lot of dogs, they don't want to ask for help. Things start to go down. And I've already had cases here in Pembroke where we've had animal cruelty, where we've lost dogs because I didn't get into that building and I didn't inspect it because of the way our definitions are written.
okay.
Is personal kennel to replace the hobby kennel?
Yes.
And so basically, it's instead of saying 6 to 10 dogs, it's saying 4 or more. That's the
Right, on a
definition.
single premises. Yep.
Doesn't change it that much, does it? I mean, 4 or more could mean 6 to 10.
4 or more on a single premises, meaning you can't have 5 dogs and you can't have 5 dogs on a single premises. Between the two of you, if you live together, you can only have 4 or more.
But isn't more 6?
More of 6, yep. But at least gets me into your building to do an inspection, and I see that your building cannot hold 10 dogs.
Right.
Your
but-
building is too small to hold 10 dogs.
You
Or
said-
12
You said
dogs.
the state is per person versus per premises.
Right.
So
Because
this,
it's a permitted activity.
but
And
again,
an
I-
individual can pull out permit. Okay, this is cute. Okay.
So can there
I
only be one permit?
love
per
that you did your
premise?
homework on this.
Well, here's the problem with this. It sounds like it's an enforcement issue more than a zoning bylaw issue. And I don't think we want to have a bylaw that does the job. In other words, if it's access and the number of dogs dictates whether you can enter a premises, this seems to cover it because 4 or more is the same as 6 to 10.
The state says more than 4.
I know.
It does not say 4 or more, so it does not get me into those buildings, does not get me into those premises.
I don't know, I don't see how it doesn't. And if there's a
More than 4 is
but if there's a-
5 or more.
If there's a potential violation that, because there's more dogs on a site than allowed, then you absolutely have the right to go in.
Nope, the state says more than 4, which is 5 or above. I'm asking for it to be changed to 4 or more, which yes, means that, and on a single premises,
Okay,
not owned by a single person.
Okay.
Does the state say person or premise?
Person.
Are we allowed to be more restrictive than the state? Is that
Yes,
the kind
you
of-
are, you just can't be less.
Well, and also, more than one person is on a premises along with the amount of dogs they're allowed to have. So I just don't see how we're in conflict with the state law and how, even if we were, that would preclude you from having access to a property where you clearly see a violation happening.
Because if you say, I don't see a violation happening, I'm not in that premises, I haven't inspected that building.
Okay.
So I might not see that there's a problem going on. With the last case we had, I
But the
didn't see
bylaw
there
would-
was,
But this bylaw wouldn't help you with that either.
this bylaw would help me. The way I wrote it would
But
help me.
if you don't
4
know
or
there's a
more
vi-
dogs,
but
they had
how-
4 dogs.
But my confusion here is, how does a bylaw allow you to see things that you weren't able to see before?
Because they only had 4 dogs. The way the state's bylaw is written right now, it is more than 4 dogs allows me into a premises. They only had 4.
Okay,
I did not go in and inspect that premises.
gotcha. All right. Well, it's up to the board. What would the board like to do?
Man. I don't feel like 4 is still too many.
4 is a lot, yeah?
You know,
4 is a
for
lot.
animal abuse, you know.
So I feel like I need some more time to digest.
Okay.
Because I did read everything that you sent
Oh,
over
sure.
before, I went through the
Absolutely.
definitions, I went through every one of the bylaws, but I feel like with your added content, I just feel like I need to digest it. I'm prepared to make a decision.
When's our next meeting?
February 10th.
February 10th. I think I want to table this until the next, maybe fall. I'm not speaking for the rest of you. I want you to have input on this.
To the next town meeting.
Yes.
We just
Oh,
discussed.
yeah.
Yes, that's
Fall
what
town meeting,
fall
yeah.
town meeting.
Would that be?
It's in your hands.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, February 10th is when the warrant closes.
February 14th.
February 14th, okay, so pretty close to that. I guess we could talk about it on February 10th and revisit it. But I'm leaning towards maybe pushing this off towards fall, just because we want to do a little bit more due diligence on this.
Right, and we'd have to run it through town council and everything too, to
Yeah.
make sure that all the verbiage, and I think with all the other ones we already have on there,
And
it might be,
yes.
I don't think we,
We've got a lot of bylaw changes already on the spring
Oh, I know.
town meeting
Yeah.
warrant, so,
Nope,
it's a
totally
lot for us
understand.
to explain to people.
I
Um,
literally took the state's bylaws verbatim and put them in there, except for the personal kennel. That's the only one that has a change. The other
Okay.
ones are verbatim from the state.
But if the board would like to put this off till fall, we can decide that now, that would be great. If you want to talk about it again on February 10th, I'm willing to do that too. What's the pleasure of the board?
well, the fall warrant closes in August,
Right.
right? So we would have to like bring this back up
Yeah,
Sooner than that.
sooner than that, like, so it's, maybe bringing it back, like, we could bring back up the conversation like in the spring.
okay. So we decide that now, and we wouldn't put it on the agenda for the 10th. All right? And that gives us time to kind
Yeah,
of dig into this
absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah.
All right?
No, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Nice
thank
to meet
you.
y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
All right, agenda, 8 o'clock already. Okay, informal meeting with Dan Greenberg, site manager for Stonebridge Homes, discussion on road acceptance for Copperwood. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Dude,
Thank you for hearing this for us. I'm Dan Greenberg, site manager of Stonebridge Homes. I'm also going to have Owen Kelly, my associate here, join us for some technical input as well. But we're here first and foremost to talk about Copperwood, the development that we built, and working toward road acceptance.
Okay. So on road acceptance, we've got the as-built, they've been reviewed, we've gotten Taylor Nims, well, that was Bristol.
Yep. Paul Brogna. Yep.
Brogna, right. So,
We can talk about either one, like Bristol's a more traditional, right? It's your board's project, and technically we haven't done like acceptance of the final set of plans and whatnot, so.
Okay.
And then both of them are trying to go before the planning board. Copperwood's a little funny because it's a zoning board.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, I don't know, as long as we've got the DPW looking at the as-builts, making sure that those are roads that they feel they can plow, I want to get it, I mean, I would like to get some input from them on that, at the very least. But if you're asking for road acceptance, we're gonna, I mean, things that have come up with other road acceptances, street trees are all well-established.
Yep.
Is that in Brogna's
We're actually,
report?
yep, we're actually about 1.5 to 2 years post completion of
Yeah.
the project, so we've allowed plenty of time for things to establish and mature.
Right.
Yep.
And was it always the plan for these to be accepted by the town? From the get-go?
Yep.
Yeah, although they do have a homeowners association. And we did look to see, because we've had other 40B projects come before us for road acceptance that we had to say no to.
Right.
Because in the ZBA decision, it was very specific that they would not be offered the road acceptance. I didn't see that in this case. Yeah. So yes, we'll have a public hearing, and we don't do the public hearing for road acceptance. That's done by the board, the select board.
Right.
So we're looking for your recommendation to pass it on. Please.
Maybe we would look to the DPW for any concerns of anything running on the streets that
Yeah.
are technically right now.
They're gonna be plowing it, so,
Was the street done to our standards, like of our regular
yeah, that was.
curbs and everything? Because I don't,
Yes,
never saw that.
that
site
was the
plan.
reason for the as-built and for the review by Brogna. And that's why I would like to have DPW take a look at it.
And he was also involved in the process. He did compaction reports. He was there when we were installing the roads, so
Yeah.
he would be the expert on the matter.
So him sitting down with Joe and
Yep.
going through it would be, get a recommendation from DPW. If they found something that they hated, they'll sure to tell us,
Absolutely.
you know. But I feel that we should, I mean, they're asking for road acceptance, so, and it goes to town meeting where it's voted on. And if DPW had a really hard time with us accepting this because they have to take on the burden of road repairs and things like that, they'll let us know. Great.
I don't know the project, so I'm like,
Yeah.
it was a 40B?
Yeah, it's 40 feet.
And any septic or anything under the street, any shared pipes.
Whatever's on the as-built.
And so then for Bristol specifically, we gotta technically wrap it up. It's a funny one because the engineering took a while to do all the as-built documents. We wrapped up everything over 2 years ago at this point. And luckily, that gives us a nice test that hasn't had problems, you know, for the last 2 years. Everything seems to be working nicely. But I think technically, we still have a bond with the town.
Yes,
Um,
and we got Tyler's report today. There's just a couple of things on that report.
Yeah, he was really just questioning where the, like, roof drains were and which ones were. We've got a couple, like, daylight pipes instead of sump pump pipes. Out front of the
Basic
basement.
clarification.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're more plan-related than,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, that would be like any road acceptance. I mean, subdivisions come to us for road acceptance typically. And you're like 2 or 3 years outside of that one too. And there was some issue with the street trees there for a little while. Did you have to replant some?
There was a concern raised by the homeowners that some wouldn't take, but they've taken fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know back then I took a ride down and looked at it, and they looked fine to me. So, yeah, we would, again, if you're asking for it, we should probably put it forward.
And then I don't know if it's a separate, like, I don't know if we have to have a hearing to do the bond release for the rest of it? or-
No, that's not a hearing.
Okay, fine.
Just once you're done,
Okay.
and we got the as-bills, and the as-bills have been reviewed by Merrill, Copperwood, Bristol came.
Right. Merrill was the design engineer for both, so.
For both, okay.
NIMS did the review.
Yeah, NIMS
for-
worked for us,
Yeah.
so that's his review for us, and did we have, who did Brogna did
Wagner did Copperwood, yes.
Yeah, okay, so,
Technically, the zoning board's holding the bond for that one.
Right.
So, which we've dealt with them.
okay,
But they still owe you compliance statements, so once
Right.
those are put forward, I'm sure that would release the bond at that point.
yep. Okay. You got something to say?
Yeah, what is that? Everybody says something.
We all want to hear it?
I was having trouble with, because we have turned down 40Bs before, for,
Yeah, but let me just go
Yeah.
into very specifics about that, all right? The decision that the ZBA made to allow the 40B, to accept the comprehensive permit for Cross Creek, which was the one that was discussed here at our meeting, was very specific that the homeowners association was going to take care, and the road would not be accepted by the town. That was almost like a condition for them to give them that comprehensive permit. No such thing was done with Copperwood. In other words, they didn't say, we're giving you this comprehensive permit because you're not going to ask for road acceptance.
And then, just to add a little additional, when Copperwood was being designed and approved originally for the permit, Cross Creek was having its issues and, sorting out all of that. It was designed different, it was designed to be in conformance with the town specs so that it could be plowed. Whereas Cross Creek is a much narrower road, very different, like, it has a lot of things that make it difficult to plow.
Yeah.
And that was talked about very explicitly during the approval process for the.
Another reason why we want the DPW to look at it.
Yeah.
okay, that was my only,
Yeah, well, that was the dilemma that I had as well, so we went back and looked at the decisions for Copperwood, and there was that wasn't a requirement or a condition. So, good.
Excellent.
Okay, we'll get those on the warrant.
Thank you very much, we appreciate it. I'll be in contact with you, so thank you very much.
Okay.
Good to see you, Andrew.
Here we are. All right, routine administrative matters. Does that mean you want us to approve the minutes?
Yes, please. And the annual report.
And the annual report. So do I have a motion to accept the minutes of Monday, January 6th, 2024?
I make motion to accept the minutes from January 6, 2024.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. All right. We don't generally need a vote on the town report, so, it looks good to me. Unless someone wants to formally approve it, but I think you can go with it.
Got it.
And then what's the extension request?
Oh, yes, for Country Club, for the special permit.
So they're making a request in writing for an extension of the site plan approval and special permit for weather vane. Okay, so they'd like an additional year until February 26th, 2026. This is so they can work out the design of the wastewater treatment facilities for the large-scale project. So per our bylaws, they're asking for an additional year. So do I have a motion to extend the special permit until February 26th, 2026?
Yes. So moved, as you said.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great.
Just a reminder for everybody to do their compliance.
When does it due?
The end of the month, Friday?
Excellent.
Have you done yours?
No, I have not done mine. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah. Coming to that this week.
I feel like I just did last year's.
Oh.
All right, so any other business before the board? Great, I'll accept the motion.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Do I have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Great. Thanks.